launched the Infrastructure Forum. It is an initiative that is headed by the SIU and DPWI with forum members from both the private sector, civil society, as well as government, as well as law enforcement agencies. And so just with those brief opening remarks, I just quickly want to run through the program. Minister Delo will be briefing us shortly. Thereafter, Advocate TV will brief us, and then we'll have that followed by remarks by Dr. Jose Ramakopa and representing the forum members, Mr. Karan Singh from Corruption Watch will say a few words. And we really want to dedicate a lot of the time to questions, the Q&A session from the media. So it's a very short program. And as I said, we'll have Mr. Karan Singh saying a few words on behalf of the forum members. And so I also want to welcome all of the forum members who are joining us virtually. Thank you for joining us. Obviously, these are the times that we live in, and so we have to keep our numbers low. So thank you all for joining us virtually, the members of the media as well. And I will now hand over to Minister Delo to brief us.
Good morning.
Morning.
Goeiemorgen. Moweni. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for being here. And it's also for me nice to be back in Cape Town. I'm a visitor to Cape Town nowadays. I want to greet the head of the Special Investigating Unit, Advocate Watibe. Also, Advocate Rodney de Kock, the Deputy National Director of Public Prosecutions, the Acting DG of Public Works, Mr. Imtiaz Faisal, and then the Head of Infrastructure, Dr. Jose Ramakopa, and all the forum members, the Council for the Built Environment, Ms. Priscilla Mdalose, Mr. Charles Nduku, who's the President of the South African Council for the Architectural Profession, Mr. Karan Singh, Head of Legal and Investigations from Corruption Watch, officials from DPWI and SIU, forum members who are joining us virtually. Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming out this morning for the launch of the Infrastructure Bill Anti-Corruption Forum. Now, a lot of work has happened already by all the forum members. So today is really the official launch of the forum. So I'm also joined by Advocate Motibe, who is going to, and was shown very, very strong leadership in assisting us and bringing us where we are today. And for that, I want to thank you, Advocate. So the forum members, if I can just give you a breakdown, the forum consists of the SIU, the National Prosecuting Authority, the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, the Financial Intelligence Center, Corruption Watch, the Council for the Built Environment, Master Builders Association, South African Council for Architectural Professions, Consulting Engineers for South Africa, EXA, the South African Black Technical and Allied Careers Organization, SAPTACU, the South African Bureau of Standards, Business Unity South Africa, and the Human Science Research Council. These are the members that we are starting off with, but certainly as we go along, we can always co-opt and bring more members on board. So the forum that we are establishing is part of the goals of the National Development Plan, which is clear in fighting corruption, and that it also should involve all members of society. The forum is also part of government's 7 key priorities of the 6th administration to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. Colleagues, and we all know that corruption has run rampant in our country in the built environment for too long. The state has the structures in place, but government cannot do this work alone. And that is why we brought together the private sector, public entities, civil society in this forum so that we can work together. And in so doing, we will be able to prevent and detect corruption. Our people need better roads, hospitals, schools, better services, better government buildings. And we cannot allow the crooks to continue to steal billions from infrastructure. People, no matter who they are, cannot be allowed to continue to steal and stifle progress and delivery at the expense of the most vulnerable in our society. Anyone involved in corrupt activities found guilty must face the full consequences of the law. And therefore, this forum is being established to bring together all the stakeholders to ensure more effective investigations and also for investigations to be expedited. Because we must work together to put an end to the scourge of corruption, because corruption steals from the poor. We also need a clear path in delivering quality infrastructure to create the crowding and effects for more investment from the private sector. Corruption is also causing a trust deficit between government and investors. And we must work hard to instill confidence in investors to invest more money in infrastructure in our country. And this is what we need to fix. We need to fix that trust deficit. And to regain the confidence of society at large and investors, we must show that government is capable of holding the corrupt and the delinquent to account. So the forum will be an integral tool in our ammunition of measures to mitigate against corruption while we implement the infrastructure investment plan. The work of this forum and other measures to guard the infrastructure investment plan against corruption will also bring a greater level of transparency and will give credibility to the implementation of the infrastructure investment plan. Corruption thrives where there's no openness. And therefore, transparency is the best deterrent to root out corruption. We need all hands on deck to root out corruption and assist with the reconstruction and recovery of our economy. Because if we don't get this right, we will all sink together. So the forum will have oversight of investigations, and we'll see various agencies working together to investigate any reported and alleged corruption so that we will enhance accountability in the implementation of the infrastructure investment plan. What is different about this forum is that we bring together all of the forum, all of the stakeholders, law enforcement, civil society, the private sector, state institutions. And we've adopted a collaborative approach, a multidisciplinary approach to prevent and detect corruption and prevent fraud and corruption in the infrastructure space. By having all the relevant parties sitting together around the same table, the necessary work to be done in attending to the allegations can be allocated to the relevant structure, to the relevant party, who is best to deal with the matter based on their mandate. I'm just going to give you a summary of the mandate of the forum. The mandate of the forum is to collaborate, consult, and support and cooperate with one another to address the consequences of vulnerabilities in the infrastructure sector through 1, criminal prosecution and civil litigation, as well as through prevention initiatives such as corruption risk assessments, awareness programs, identification and detection of corruption, controls, improvements, systems recommendations, and most importantly, monitoring and reporting. So in terms of how the investigations will be done, to expedite the investigations, the forum will then also report on a quarterly basis. We will report regularly about the work that we are doing. So we have established a forum steering committee, which will assess all allegations received and then refer those allegations for further action to the relevant structure. But the steering committee will also monitor these referrals and make sure that we fast track those referrals. In terms of the role of the private sector, professional bodies and civil society organizations all on the forum, they can bring allegations directly to the forum for investigations, and we will then assist with the investigations and then also monitor the investigations. And then the forum, we want to see that the forum will be a strong emphasis on prevention. Because what is happening in our country? A culture has developed where we spend a lot of money and resources after the event to find out what went wrong. Our strategy is that we must invest more money in prevention and detection rather than waste all of that money afterwards on commissions of inquiries and all of that. So the forum will strengthen work in the prevention space and also ensure a more proactive approach. Another area of work which the forum agreed on is the need to encourage more people to come forward with information and suspected wrongdoing and fraud. People also fear speaking out. And many times whistleblowers' lives are at risk when they take the bold step to expose corruption. The forum agreed that one of its main areas of work will be to look into how whistleblowers can be incentivized and rewarded for coming forward with information that could lead to successful prosecution. So we will be working with the forum to see how we can incentivize the public to come forward with more information, and how do we strengthen the whistleblowers' protection. So we are really determined, ladies and gentlemen, that we must continue to deliver good infrastructure for our people without corruption. So as the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, the seed money that we have made available, because I don't want to hear the excuse that we don't have money in government. If we have money for all of these commissions afterwards, we must find the money also to invest in prevention and detection. And therefore, we've made available 10 million rand as seed funding. We will sign a memorandum of agreement with the SIU that will be central in driving these programs with us. So we also, the SIU already has got a whistleblowing hotline. And the number is 0800 037 774, or via email to the SIU at whistleblowing.co.za. And we want to assure the people that come forward with information, their identity will be kept confidential, and that they should not fear that their names or anything will be mentioned. So we will also be setting up a dedicated email address for people to report information directly to the secretariat of this forum. And as I said in the beginning, we're formalizing what we've been doing already with the SIU, with the NPA, with the Hawks. And we will be giving you quarterly reports on some of the investigations. I will now hand over to Advocate Motibe to also give us more details about the role and function of the SIU in this forum initiative. And I want to thank all the members of civil society and the private sector. When I wrote to these organizations, they enthusiastically agreed immediately to be part of this forum. And I want to thank all of them for their commitment to make sure that as a society as a whole, as a country as a whole, we work together to bring an end to corruption in our country. I thank you very much. Advocate Motibe.
Minister Jalil, thank you very much for this opportunity to then indicate as SIU what our role would be. I also just acknowledge and greet Dr. Ramaphosa, who's the head of the Infrastructure South Africa at the presidency. Also acknowledge and greet my colleague, Dr. Advocate Diko, from the National Prosecuting Authority, also a member of the Anti-Corruption Task Team. I also greet the head of legal and investigations at Corruption Watch, Mr. Karam Singh. I also greet the CEO of the Council for the Built Environment, Ms. Priscilla Mzanose, and also the president of South African Council for Architectural Profession, Mr. Charles. I greet all the members of the media, the members of the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, members of the Special Investigating Unit, and I also greet the members of the Anti-Corruption Task Team and members from the Infrastructure SA that may be present with us. It really gives me an opportunity to come here and at the launch of this very important forum. This forum is really going to enable all of us to ensure that we put measures in place to mitigate the risks of corruption, maladministration, malpractice that beset the infrastructure build sector. So now, as the Special Investigating Unit, we are part of the Anti-Corruption Task Team, which you may be aware that was established in 2010 with the primary mandate of preventing, detecting, investigating, and prosecuting cases of corruption in a coordinated manner. In the Anti-Corruption Task Team, the SIU is the convener of the program that focuses on ensuring that we've got forums of this nature. And the forums of this nature have been created after SIU has led the Corruption Vulnerable Sector Risk Assessment under the banner of the Anti-Corruption Task Team. Now, this risk assessment was more focused to the sectors and institutions in the sector with high risk on specific vulnerabilities to the manifestation of corruption practices or activities. We did that in collaboration with other stakeholders in the Anti-Corruption Task Team. We were also informed, because we do participate at the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. We also took into account various outcomes of parliamentary oversight committees and also the Auditor General outcomes. SIU has also identified sectors vulnerable to corruption. These sectors include, amongst others, the health sector, the local government, infrastructure sector, and the state-owned entities, transport, energy, financial sector, mining, water management. These are just but some of the sectors that we have identified as vulnerable. Now, through this risk assessment, infrastructure sector was identified as one of the most vulnerable sectors that requires immediate attention. Critical factors that were taken into account to prioritize this sector includes, amongst others, the developmental role played by the rolling out of infrastructure projects and the government spending in the sector. Therefore, it is important that the integrity and transparency is maintained in all the infrastructure projects. We also looked at the approval of infrastructure investment plan, which the minister indicated upon, and the objectives of that plan. That was adopted by Cabinet last year to stimulate the economy as one of the government priorities. And the target, we also took into account the target set by the National Planning Commission for government to spend about 10% of its GDP on infrastructure by 2020. The risk assessment that we did, I want just to state a few, it revealed key vulnerabilities in the infrastructure or construction sector, which include, amongst others, the following. We found that there were high CIDB grading issued to non-deserving contractors. And this you can imagine that if you are a contractor and you get a higher CIDB grading and you don't deserve it, you're likely, the likely risk there is that the infrastructure that you will develop is an infrastructure that's probably not fit for purpose. The quality will be questionable, and that has the potential to create risk for our people, and probably not value for money for the state. We also discovered that there were regulatory weaknesses in construction sector compliance enforcement. Price fixing and/or collusion, this is the so-called cartel behavior by large entities in the construction sector. In this event, the recent example, or perhaps not so recent, the 2010 construction initiative that happened, and we worked and we engaged and checked whether there's an opportunity for SIU also to play its role in correcting that situation. We're delighted that the Competition Commission stepped in and ensured that there's consequence management in that space. Then we also found, and this is the main area, where there's procurement irregularities in awarding of tenders. This is where some of the irregularities are happening. the so-called facilitation payment, circumventing approval processes through bribery and kickbacks, defrauding state through usage of substandard construction material to make a profit, issuing of illegal environmental licenses or permit for large developers to develop insensitive environmental areas. Violent construction disruption. We've seen this violent disruption of construction sites led by entities claiming to be local communities or business forums demanding state in the infrastructure project. The special investigating units in the infrastructure built under the various proclamations have also observed similar observations that I've indicated. The observations that we observed in our investigation is that about 80% of irregularities in the infrastructure built are in the procurement process, an end-to-end procurement process. The current value of alleged irregularities investigated by the Special Investigating Unit in the infrastructure build investigations to date totals just over 10 billion. To this end, it will be very important that transparency is introduced in the infrastructure build procurement process and effective corruption risk prevention framework is introduced. It is against this background that the Infrastructure Build Anti-Corruption Forum is established to galvanize all the stakeholders into action and implement the Infrastructure Build Anti-Corruption strategy and framework. As the minister said, this is really just to put in place the structure. All of this was happening, but we are now structuring it formally. We've been doing work with the department, investigating in the public works and infrastructure. We've also had a very valuable collaboration with the presidency under the infrastructure SA that's led by Dr. Ramokoko when we do our investigation. And now we are seeking to really structure that. Now, this strategy should, amongst others, assist with the detection, prevention of corruption in the implementation of the infrastructure investment plan, and recommend control measures to mitigate the corruption risk. Now, just to state a few, the proactive corruption prevention approach in the anti-corruption strategy should, amongst others, be enabled by a proactive portfolio risk management. That's very critical. Data analytics and predictive models, just so that we are able to detect or determine what are the scenarios that we have to look at. Risk disclosure standards, risk governance, monitoring and reporting measures, real-time assurance. From time to time, we need to make sure that the project is running well and we continue to get value for money. Real-time audits, and these are just amongst others. This is the proactive part which the minister has emphasized that this forum is going to have to come up with a strategy to ensure that the preventive and identification methods are really stepped up so that we can detect and save money before it's lost. The reactive part, of course, envisages mainly the following: effective investigation, prosecution, recovery of stolen money, consequence management, restriction of service providers where they have made themselves guilty of misconduct. The Infrastructure Build Anti-Corruption Forum has its specific terms of reference, which we expect after today, after the launch through the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, that the terms of reference will be signed off. And as I said at the inaugural meeting, that work will begin in earnest. These terms of reference, amongst others, will ensure collaboration with various stakeholders in the fight against fraud and corruption in this sector, identify areas of cooperation to enhance prevention, detection, civil litigation, and prosecution of fraud and corruption in the infrastructure build sector. We will bring a greater level of transparency and will give credibility to the implementation of the infrastructure investment plan and the achievement of its objective. Transparency and collaboration is key if we are to wage an effective fight against corruption. And this forum, because it consists of diverse stakeholders, it takes into account what the national anti-corruption strategy say, the societal approach to the fight against corruption, and that will assist in resolving corruption allegations speedily. These stakeholders, as the minister has outlined, they include various members of the forum. So to this end, we look forward to working with all stakeholders to ensure the success of this infrastructure build anti-corruption forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Advocate Muthibi, for those words. And I now call up Dr. Sienza Ramakopa, the Head of Infrastructure South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zara. Good morning to Honorable Minister Patricia David, the head of the SIU Advocate TV, the acting DG of Department of Public Works and Infrastructure and the Interior Space, and also the august members of the forum in the form of Advocate Cook, Mr. Karam Singh, Mr. Priscilla Ndalose, and also Mr. Charles Dugu, and the rest of the members of the forum who have joined us. And also let me extend my warm and sincere greetings to members of the media. I'm just going to provide one or two areas of emphasis. As you know that about 13 months ago, the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Minister Lee, unveiled an infrastructure investment pipeline to the tune of 350 billion rand, which is financed by the multilateral development banks, the commercial banks, and the PFIs, with very little support from the fiscals, because the intention of that infrastructure investment plan was to broaden the flow of financing instruments available to the country in the light of a deteriorating fiscal matrix. And that infrastructure investment plan then became one of the principal anchors of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan that was unveiled by the President to the country. And in this characterization, the President refers to the economic reconstruction and recovery plan as a flywheel that is going to help us in the recovery effort. Now, in our own formulation under the stewardship of Minister Lee, we then generated what we call a risk matrix, so trying to understand what are those things that can delay or undermine the achievement of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan through the lenses of the infrastructure investment plan. So we came with about 4 areas that requires attention. The first one was to bolster state capacity, especially as we refer to both the technical and financial engineering capacity of the state. So by passage of time, the state has been hemorrhaging skills, the state has been hollowed out. So it's important that we start an exercise where the state is able to recreate many of the skills that have been lost, but also a period of time then develop the kind of skills that are required to drive an ambitious and aggressive infrastructure build program. And the second one that we identified there was what we call an agile regulatory framework. So you know that the contribution of the triple Ps to the infrastructure build program is minuscule. I think we're sitting at 2%. And with a deteriorating fiscal matrix, I think it's important that we elevate its contribution or the share of the infrastructure delivery program to be more significant. And in this way, then we have to look at the regulatory framework, address the issues of permitting and licensing. And here I'm talking about issues around water use licenses, issues that have to do with records of deficiency like EIAs, and also zoning certificates. And then the third area of risk is around site disruption. So you know that there's many projects in the country, mature ensure that there's quality participation of the local contractors and companies, genuine people who want to participate and benefit from investments in those spaces. And the second one has to do with law enforcement. So these are people whose intention really is to steal from this project. And then the fourth area has to do with leakage. And the leakage has multiple manifestations. And in this instance, really, I want to elevate the issue of fraud and corruption. So what this initiative really seeks to do is to address the fourth area of fraud and corruption. And we know that our inability to deliver on the economic reconstruction and recovery plan is going to undermine the credibility of the state, is going to reverse the democratic gains, and is also going to delay the objective, the realizations of the objective of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan. And as Advocate Mtiba correctly indicated, is that we're already working with the SIU, but this is cause effect. Already they will have determined that there's some area of leakage, the suspicion of fraudulent activity. So we're already having that relationship. But through the guidance of the minister was that, look, if you are going to have a post event, that it's not particularly helpful. The state must build the necessary instruments and capacity to prevent the occurrence of fraud and corruption. And that was the bet of this forum. And the minister then insisted that in the creation of this forum, it is important that we were able to galvanize non-state actors. And that's why you see that the forum really is broadly representative of the people in the built environment space. So really, the intention is to galvanize society behind this noble program of ensuring that state resources best be directed at the right areas. And in this way, we are going to accelerate the delivery of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, restore state credibility, and ensure that the people are able to gain or draw the democratic dividends. And then just on our part, as I conclude, is that we will do like two things. The first one is that we, under the auspices of that memorandum of agreement, as referred to by both Honorable Minister and Advocate Mtiba, we are going to design a framework and minimum standards that are going to inform all of the project across the public sector. Obviously, that will be over a period of time, because in many instances, one of the project owners receive SOPs, various government departments, and the various spheres of the government. So I think we're going to standardize that and design issues of artificial intelligence as referred to by Advocate Mtiba. And the second one is to ensure that all projects that are going to be coming through the infrastructure South Africa will have to sign to this framework. So the project owners, project sponsors must commit to this framework, so that we have the see-through of all the projects, from conception until delivery, and also post-delivery during the period of maintenance. That there's a direct participation of the forum, and the MOA will design and define what that participation is. So essentially what this exercise we're doing today, as led by Minister Delil and anchored by Advocate Mtiba, is to ensure that the ambitious objectives of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan has to be delivered. The issues around the localization, broadening the manufacturing base, and created the kind of employment that is required just to be achieved. So it mustn't be seen in isolation, but it's part of the aggregate interventions of government to ensure that we achieve the recovery effort. And in fact, we surpass the pre-COVID levels in terms of the economic growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramaphosa, for those words, and emphasizing just the importance and focus that's being put behind the infrastructure investment plan, which Minister Whistleblowing announced last year after Cabinet approved it. To those joining us virtually, I just want to make a request, especially to members of the media on the virtual platform. If you could kindly post your questions in the chat and post those questions publicly so that I can read out the questions to the panelists from here. I'm not hosting the Zoom platform, but if you can share your questions publicly, I can pick them up and pose them during the Q&A session. We'll start with the media that is here present with us in Mbizo Center. We'll take questions here, and then I'll go to the Zoom platform for Q&A. So please, if you could post your questions publicly in the chat. And then our final panelist for the day to address us is Mr. Karan Singh from Corruption Watch.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Special thanks to Minister Dalil for allowing us to be part of this gathering. Also special greetings to the head of the SIU, Advocate Mativi, and the other esteemed members of the forum. I won't assume that everybody in the room is completely aware of who Corruption Watch is. Corruption Watch is one of South Africa's leading civil society organizations, formed in 2012. We've received annually thousands of whistleblower complaints and reports, and since inception, we've received over 35,000 complaints. So I think it's important to note that Corruption Watch is not a statutory or constitutionally mandated body. We don't purport to be the sole representative of civil society. And as this forum develops, we look forward to being part of a robust civil society grouping that contributes to the work of the forum. We did not receive our mandate via elections or via party conferences. We receive our mandate via consent from the public and from those who support and trust us to pursue the fight against corruption in all of its manifestations. Corruption Watch has been actively involved in the formulation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which we look forward to the President launching soon. And we've actively been participating in some of the other fora that Advocate Mativi mentioned, including the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum and the Local Government Anti-Corruption Forum. Just a couple of words on what role civil society can play in these types of bodies. I think it's critical to note that we have an important role to play when it comes to sharing of information, when it comes to interfacing with the public in terms of the receipt of corruption reports, identifying trends and risks, converting that into advocacy for action, for reform, for change, providing some independent oversight, and building public education and awareness. A couple of points that the others have mentioned, but I'd like to just emphasize. One is the point of whistleblower protection. Whether we like it or not, we're still living in a circumstance where whistleblowers are victimized, where whistleblowers are abused, where their physical safety is put under threat, and we know in some cases whistleblowers have even been assassinated. So as we ramp up our fight against corruption, we need to really take a step back and think about issues around whistleblower protection. And I was encouraged to note the minister's comments around this notion of incentivizing whistleblowing. I think this is a potentially controversial area, especially if you talk about something that goes beyond honorary mentions, but potential financial rewards. This is something which we've seen in other jurisdictions, and it's something that we need to seriously give some consideration to. Some important themes, anti-corruption themes: good governance, transparency, and accountability. Well, I think the head of the SIU has spoken at length around issues around accountability and consequence management. This is very much at the end of the process when there's been an investigation, and then we seek to implement the findings and recommendations of those investigations. Good governance, I think, speaks to our preventative measures, and putting forums like this in place speaks to that issue of good governance. That leaves us with the tricky area around transparency. And transparency is about the devil in the detail. So it's about what information do we require, when do we require it, and to whom? So the production of information through increased transparency mechanisms is important. But we need to have mechanisms in place within the state, within civil society, to be able to properly engage for that information and engage in monitoring. We were taken aback during the PPE debacle at the inability of government to be able to have proactive monitoring systems in place. And I think this is key to the whole issue around transparency. In the built environment, part of this also relates to notions around beneficial ownership, transparency. So who are the real owners of companies? Is fronting taking place? So I think those types of reforms are things that we will continue to emphasize, and I think will be important to the work of this forum. Similarly, the whole principle around procurement reform. We're aware of what the Constitution requires in Section 217, a fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective system. National Treasury have put forth a public procurement bill, came out this time last year, probably over hundreds of comments that they've received. But at the moment, we're not seeing the urgency from government in terms of pushing that legislation through. We're in the process of delivering correspondence to the Minister of Finance and the President to understand, to take us into their confidence about where this process is going. We really need to see broad-scale legislative reform in the area of procurement to address some of the challenges which we picked up. You only need to look at the Special Investigations report from last year on the PPE to see how the procurement system has been abused. Lastly is the notion of promoting open government. Again, this goes back to principles around transparency, but it also goes back to issues about how we do business. Do we have an open government approach to doing business? Have we adopted open data standards? The principle around open contracting and open contracting data standards. These are issues which are being pursued in government, but we need to see renewed commitment to them because it's critical to these issues that we're talking about here. So colleagues, I think with those few comments, again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. We look forward to receiving your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Singh, as well as to Minister Below, Advocate TV, and Dr. Ramakopa for that comprehensive outline. I'm hoping that the comprehensive briefings by everyone is the reason that I'm not seeing any questions on the chat, which is always a good thing. I know there's a mouthful, but we provided copies of Advocate TV's remarks as well as a joint statement by Minister Below and Advocate TV, and I'm sure that the forum members behind us will avail themselves for one-on-one interviews after this, just outside. So feel free to approach any of the forum members. We just wanted to keep the program tight so as not to keep us all in the space for too long. And as I said earlier, to allow for questions. So if I may start with our media colleagues here at the Inviso Center, colleagues, do we have any questions yet? We've got Lindsay Daitinger from NCA, and then Bulelani Philip, SABC, and then Bavalo Ndenze from EWN. Okay, so we'll take those three, and then we'll go Lindsay, Bulelani, and then Bavalo. Thank you, Lindsay, you may go.
Thanks, Zara. Just a quick question, in reference to those infrastructure projects that were highlighted, named by Cabinet. Have any of the investigations already, are you starting to look at any of those projects? And we know that the Lesotho Highlands project is already underway. Are there any of those that are already on your radar for investigation? Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. We'll go to Bulelani with all questions and then give over the panel to respond.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Firstly, Minister, on the issue of incentivizing whistleblowers, have you worked out the mechanics of how much? The second one is that, can you give us an update on the status of the DG in your office? And to you, Advocate TV, you largely rely on proclamations from the president to carry out investigations. Now you're gonna sit around the table with all the stakeholders, but ultimately, in terms of carrying out investigations, to rely on the proclamation. Do you see that as a stumbling block or delay in terms of carrying out the corruption investigation? The second one, lastly, I know we're talking about the environment, but can you allow me just to ask the question? There is allegations of impropriety against the health minister through the communications company Digital Vibes. I know that the statement was issued that it's part and parcel of the proclamations that were issued by the president and the DPEs. Can you give us an update of how far is that investigation? And secondly, is the minister under investigation? Thank you.
Thank you, Bolani Bagala.
Hi, thanks, Minister. Just for Mr. Advocate Motivi first. There are a number of investigations, with the big four construction companies, for example, in the Kusile matter, the Kusile construction, and the subcontractor, as well as a law firm. But I've just noticed that the focus is usually on state officials. I know that the Department of Public Works is investigating a number of officials for other impropriety in other projects like Spike Bridge. They are even vetting state security and supply chain management officials at some level. Are the biggest culprits in these constructions, and my question, are the biggest culprits not the private sector or the big construction companies, the big state suppliers, as opposed to a director in this department for that one? And just on the whistleblower incentive scheme, will they be, I imagine whistleblowers will be coming forth with information. I mean, that's the entire point. Will they be getting paid from that 10 million rand pot of cash that you mentioned earlier?
Thank you for the questions, colleagues. Minister, may I ask Dr. Ramakopa to take the first one from ENCA? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Lisa. Just to confirm that the 340 billion rand program that's I must sorry about it. Apologies. Thanks, Lindsay. Just to confirm that 340 billion rand program was made up of about 50 projects that were subsequently gazetted. And a lot of those projects were almost exclusively sponsored outside the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. So the department is not the primary sponsor of those projects. And how they get to land in Infrastructure South Africa that they were looking for funding away from the fiscal, so raise money from the debt of the market, the commercial banks, and so on. So the one thing that we did not build into that process, and which we are trying to rectify now, is that going forward, any project that comes through Infrastructure South Africa and will help to galvanize money from the debt of the market has to commit to this framework that will be articulated through the memorandum of agreement. So the only time we encounter issues in relation to procurement or any act of malfeasance, if it's when it's brought to our attention, and that's the post effect. And what the MOA seeks to do that, no, there has to be preventative measures upstream of the project being rolled out. So post this, yes, anything that comes through this process is going to be subjected to that, not just only at inception, throughout the project life cycle, so that there's comfort that indeed we are addressing issues of malfeasance. But as we start, we're going to target specific projects. Already we have developed an intelligence, we have an appreciation of projects that are at high risk from a procurement point of view. And those are the ones that are going to be elevated. Number one on the queue will follow on that. And the kind of work that advocate will refer to, the potential relationship with the CSIR is going to help us to design a mechanism that is evidence and science-based, and we can develop an algorithm on how we're going to follow this project going forward. So the long and short is that no, The ones that have been announced, the only time we'll enter into them is when a flag is being raised. But going forward, the framework will say, from inception going forward, we participate for the entire chain. 10 times.
Thank you very much, Dr. Makoko. I'm going to stay on the side to allow the respondents to go up. The minister, you will go up, and then after you will take the rest of the question.
Thank you. One of the first tasks of the Anti-Corruption Forum will be to look at existing legislation, how incentivization can happen. We know that in the South African Police Act, there is some information there, but we're looking at all the legislation in government so that we can see, when we start the incentive, where will it be located? Will it be located in the SIU, where people can pass information that can lead to successful prosecution? That's the emphasis. The other emphasis too is that we want to give people the assurance that whatever information they submit to the forum, that they will be protected, the identity will be protected. So it's the first task of the forum, and once we work out the legal framework, we will then make further announcements. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I'll respond to the question related to the proclamation. Yes, you are correct that in the main, our formal investigations, as we always say, are based on the allegations that we receive. And those allegations are sent and reported to the SIU, and we then assess those proclamations and then put together a proclamation that goes through the process to our Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, and then it goes to the President for sign-off, and that's when the formal investigation kicks off and we are able to use the powers that are in the enabling legislation of SIU. Indeed, you're right, we will be working together with other stakeholders in this forum. So to your question, whether this is a delay or not, we are awake that the speed at which we kick off investigations is very critical. So to this extent, we have actually entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Justice and the Presidency that would enable the process to the sign-off of a proclamation structured and timed. So overall, we have really managed to bring the time down to just plus minus about 30 days or so. It could be quicker, but we are saying that it shouldn't really, under a structured process, exceed those number of days. Let me also indicate that there's another mechanism in the legislation that enables the work of the State Special Investigating Unit. That mechanism is driven through what the legislation dictates as a secondment. So as SIU, we are able to enter into secondment agreements with state institutions, departments, municipalities, SOEs, to ensure that we quickly go into the state institution and look at some of those allegations that have been reported. And through that mechanism, we are really able to produce some of the results which the department can already start actioning on, including some of the consequence management process. And in that process, we would have put together the proclamation process, and this would run parallel. So that would enable us to attend to these issues quite quickly. In this environment, and the minister indicated that are going to be part of this process over and above, the anti-corruption task team, which gets involved in other, processes. We as SIU will also conclude a secondment agreement, which we have done with the department before on other investigations, but specifically on this initiative. We will conclude a secondment agreement so that we are able to tackle issues quickly, and particularly in developing this corruption prevention framework. So to date, we haven't really seen the proclamation process as a delay. The proclamation pipeline, and you might have seen recently that there's been quite a number of proclamations been signed. So we are satisfied really that the process is now really speeding up, and we continuously give feedback to the whistleblowers, by the way, that this is where it is. At the presidency or at the ministry, we are able to determine within what time frame that proclamation is likely to be signed. The allegations against the Minister of Health, you're saying, we received these allegations as part of the PPE investigations proclamation that we have. And the allegations were that there were irregularities in the procurement of services by the National Department of Health of a certain company that was provided to do the communication work there. But of course, the allegations go further, as we indicate, that some officials in the department, facilitated the process. The allegations, as you say, also indicate that the minister may have, also been involved in the process. Those are allegations, and the investigation is underway. We are at a stage where we can really say, is it an advanced stage? The investigating team has actually pointed to some of the findings as we speak. So for obvious reasons, I will not disclose now at this stage, so that we avoid some of the legal risks that we face. Those findings will be put into the legal process, and where there's a need for consequence management in the department, we will refer those to the Director General. Where there's a need for prosecution, our law requires us to send it to the National Prosecuting Authority. And where there's a need for any action, anyone at any level, including the Executive Authority, we will do so. We'll pronounce ourselves, and those referrals will be made so that appropriate action can be taken. Your follow-up may be timeline. The whole PPE investigation is earmarked to be completed by the end of August, but this specific investigation that you refer to, we'll probably be able to conclude it between today and come the end of June thereabout. So we should be able to pronounce ourselves. But of course, there continues to be investigation that comes onto the table of the investigations, and at any point in time, they continue to give a brief, and I'm involved in the review of the investigation where it is. We would like to make sure that the investigation is as comprehensive as possible, so that when we pronounce ourselves, it's based on evidence, gathered evidence sufficient, so that we are able to return defensible outcomes. The question around the Kusile construction contractors, I do agree with you that, as we always say, that corruption is really not only in the state institutions or in states. There is equal concern about the corruption in the private sector. And in areas where the private sector companies are involved, we have not held back in making the findings against those companies. typical example in the investigation at ESCOM around some of the infractions there, we did pronounce ourselves about the irregularities and the corruption that beset the contract that was concluded between ESCOM and a multinational ABB. You may be aware of that. It was publicized, and the ABB agreed when confronted with these irregularities. And of course, they also conducted their own investigation internally, and they agreed to pay back to ESCOM an amount of about 1.6 billion. Right? And in the process, we didn't just end there. We said the investigation continues. If there's criminal actions that come out of there, we will take action. And in fact, this matter will be scheduled in the special tribunal very soon, where the contract itself will be set aside. And if there are any further findings that has to be paid back to ESCOM, we will do so. Another example, in the Bay Bridge matter, you would recall, it was publicized that the companies were also taken action upon. And what they sought to do at the special tribunal was that they attacked the jurisdiction of the special tribunal to hear the matter. That part was finalized. We also presented our case. Our view is that the special tribunal had the jurisdiction to adjudicate on this matter. It was ruled on. It was ruled, and the special tribunal ruled that it does have jurisdiction to hear this matter. So the next step is again consequence management in the form of ensuring that the contract is cancelled and recover any monies that these companies would have gained unlawfully through the process. So I can go on and on, but as a principle, we agree with you that all of those private sector companies that are involved should also bear the brunt and face consequences of the outcomes of the law. Not only the state officials that from time to time we make recommendations on for consequence management, be it disciplinary action. We also ensure that those companies, and we've made pronouncements and findings around those companies are also visited by criminal prosecution in appropriate instances. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Minister. There's just one quickly while I look at the team on the podium. On the chat from Ron Nisi, the Executive Director from Master Builders, who is part of the forum. So thank you, Mr. Nisi. We've got your question. Mr. Nisi just asked, the scourge of violent construction sites invasion is as bad as the corruption. Almost all construction sites are attacked by so-called local business forums. Did I hear Advocate Motivi saying that this will be covered by the forum?
Correct. That's part of what the corruption sector risk assessment revealed, particularly in the infrastructure built environment. It has the assessment, the risk assessment pointed as that as a concern, as a worry. And of course, as part of the framework on how to deal with these incidents in the infrastructure built environment, we will have to make sure that that part is also addressed. And of course, there's going to be a multi-party approach to it. If there's criminal acts, they will have to be, investigated appropriately by the criminal investigation agencies, be it the Hawks or others. And if there's sufficient evidence, of course, the NPA will come in and ensure. In fact, at all times, it's a so-called prosecutor-guided investigations, right? And once the investigation is complete and there's sufficient evidence, Advocate Dikok is here, is the master at that, appropriate decision will be taken to take action. But it is very important in the context of the prevention that Dr. Ramokgopa indicated, that this would be, structured in such a manner that if there's a project, from the infrastructure SA and the department, there will be mechanisms of ensuring that local service providers are acknowledged one way or another, but that's the part that's dealt with within the investment plan. But correct, that violence is something that's worrying us, and we would like to make sure that it's addressed appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Mutivi.
I just forgot to one question. If you want to know what the progress is concerning the DJ Public Works and Infrastructure, you have to speak to Minister Chaveni in the presidency, the acting minister. She took over the file from the late Minister Tim. Thank you.
So, Minister and Advocate Mutivi and panel members, I think that concludes our briefing. I've not received any additional questions through the webinar chat. One last one, Kavalo, Lindsay, and Kulelani, you guys are covered. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance here today. A special thank you to those joining us virtually, the panel members who made the Advocate the COP, acting DG India's Faisal, and of course, the Minister and Advocate Mutivi for leading the charge in establishing this forum, and Dr. Kosian Ramakuba. We are very grateful for all of the hard work that's been going into this, and as Minister Denol said, there will be regular updates on the work of the forum, especially to highlight more proactive and preventative measures to curb the corruption even taking place in the first place. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and we've got some time for one-on-one interviews outside, and so we'll see you all out there, and thanks again for joining.
Thank you.